Well, welcome to this week's episode of the Decarb Connect podcast. And this week, we have a really interesting discussion, which is really going to take us into some design-led thinking and specifically looking at how design-led thinking can radically kind of drive a rethink of decarbonization and the issues around it in the mining sector. And to help kind of fill that out, we have Carl Weatherell, who's the Executive Director and CEO at Canada's Mining Innovation Council. So Carl, hello. Good to see you here, be with you here.
Hi, Alex. Great to be here. This is going to be a fun discussion. Really looking forward to it.
Thank you. And yeah, as always, I promise this is not me being lazy. It's just that people are nearly always better storytellers than I am. Tell me a bit about how have you come to this point in time when we are sitting here talking about issues of sustainability and decarbonization in the mining sector?
Well, it's really interesting, Alex, because I'm not from the mining industry. That's the first thing I tell people is I've spent a total of 4 months at a mine site as a student back in the 80s. Although I did spend some time in a federal government lab. But the interesting thing, what I've done in my career is actually sat at the 4 corners of innovation. So in a for-profit, in a university, in a nonprofit government lab, and they're all connected in the innovation space. But I guess my focal point for my career is consortia. So I started working my first consortium in 1988, been involved in about 3 dozen now in various industries such as mining, software engineering, defense, microelectronics. And in each of those, it's a matter of trying to get people with diverse thoughts or people that don't know they need to collaborate, have common challenges, and bringing those disparate and seemingly unrelated people together to actually solve common problems and change possibilities and turn them into plans and actions. So that's kind of a roundabout way of how I ended up running an innovation organization. That's what I've been doing for my entire career.
And the rest of it, like the kind of the rest of your group, the rest of the leadership group at CEMIC, what?
So CEMIC, we're a small nonprofit in Canada. We're physically located in Canada, although right now about 45% of our project participants members are international. So places like Europe and Australia are the two main ones. We have project participants in South America and Africa. We have 2 innovation managers in mining, one in mining, looking at servers in underground mining, and another one in processing. And we call them innovation managers because they're not project managers, looking at how do we rethink what we're doing and take those ideas and turn them into actual projects. So essentially, we're a global organization. That's why we call ourselves CEMIC, not Canada Mining Innovation Council. Yes, you can work with us, and we're trying to transform the industry to a zero waste industry. That's what's driving us, looking at things differently.
Yeah, what I really enjoyed about our initial conversation was this isn't you and your team and the kind of thinking around this is not tinkering around the edges of the issue. It is, as we've kind of posited in the title of this is about a radical rethink of the energy equation of the mining sector. So let's dive into that then. Let's start with, so CEMIC, obviously, as you've explained, has this kind of whole focus on innovation, radical innovation in many ways. What are those different thought processes that you're bringing to the issue of decarbonisation and sustainability? So when you look at the other stakeholders and constituents of this kind of issue in decarbonisation of mining, sustainability of mining, what's different about the approach, either the mindset or the behaviours that you and your group are bringing to the table?
So a great question, Alex. And the simple answer is we don't focus on decarbonisation and sustainability. If you focus on low-hanging fruit, you'll achieve low-hanging fruit results. We're looking at transformation. As I mentioned just a few seconds ago, zero waste industry focus on energy, water, environmental footprint. So when you start looking at aspirational types of goals, we end up forcing organizations and people, specifically people, to rethink existing approaches to the business, tackle existing paradigms of the business that hold back progress, and have a much, much higher impact. If we focus on narrowly defined goals, we'll achieve those readily by, people are talking about targets of 2030 for decarbonization, but what if you tackle the entire energy footprint? What would that mean? And by doing these higher end goals and aspirational transformational sort of goals, we'll achieve much greater results and faster, because a key piece of how we operate is it's not us. It's not the 4 of us. we basically assemble the senior leadership in mining companies to define these metrics, define the approaches to move forward, and actually push things forward. So we just facilitate the process, and in some cases manage projects. So it's a little bit different. This business ecosystem concept we actually brought from the software industry. So they're doing it already. Let's import that. And I'll give you a really good example of this, of the challenge in a rethink approach. So it's fairly common knowledge that combination of crushing and grinding of rocks and mining consumes 35 to 50% of the energy in a mine site, and yet the technology is highly inefficient. Right? Some people say 95%, whatever that number is. It's pretty inefficient. Has been for years. That platform technology, that's a key word, that platform technology has not changed in decades. So we asked the question back in 2015, can we actually develop a technology that reduces energy in combination by 50%? And the immediate reaction was, yeah, we've heard it before, it's impossible, you can't do it. So we went from 2015 saying, can we do this, to December 2020 with the first prototype of a new device, a new crushing and grinding machine that showed a 42% reduction in energy in 5 years. Because of the asking that question, can we do this? Assembling the team of experts around the table to figure out how do we do this together versus I'm going to do it myself. And we've essentially got 31 people from 6 mining companies and suppliers around the world working on this. So it's not just us. It's big challenge, intractable, impossible challenge. Get the team together, figure out how to solve it. So that's one example.
And the phrase that I used at the beginning is one that you were talking about again in our initial chat, which is that this idea of design-led thinking. And on this podcast, we've had one kind of, actually, I guess 2 conversations that have touched on this before, but one was with a UK company, Celsa UK Steel, and we had their innovation manager on, who is also not from his sector, if you like. So you're not a miner. He wasn't a steel guy, but what he was someone that brought design-led thinking from other industries into the steel sector. So we sort of touched on this before, but for those who either haven't heard that or haven't heard the phrase before, just give a little bit of a sort of shape to that. What does it mean to say we're really looking at this from a design-led point of view?
So no, that's awesome, Alex. I love talking about this stuff, even though I'm not an expert in design thinking. So I'll make that statement right up front. But what design thinking does, it focuses on the user, focuses on the person. It doesn't focus on the technology. It doesn't focus on the engineering design or the flow sheets. It's on the person. Because what design thinking does is it takes your existing challenges and looks at the existing design principles, tears those apart, and tries to come up with new design principles and changing the paradigm. So, for example, an existing design principle is we're going to design a mine and we will produce tailings. Design thinking would take a look at that and say, well, what if you didn't produce tailings? What would the design principles look like so you didn't get the tailings? You didn't produce tailings, or you reduced energy by 50%. So it focuses on the person and a lot of the inherent biases or cognitive dissonance that people have, because we typically revert to cognitive dissonance is like reverting to our existing status quo. We need to produce tailings. No, we don't. Well, that's really cool. Let's try and go down. No, we don't. We have to produce tailings. So this tears that apart and breaks down the paradigms. And a huge piece of this, and I'll reemphasize this, is that most people believe innovation, or in the topic of this podcast, decarbonization, is technical. It is not technical. It's about 95% people. Innovation is about people. These challenges are about people. Actually, there's a number of articles we've written in the last 2 years on the focus is people, not technology. And this approach tackles the people side of it. And I'll give you a really good example of this. I love anecdotes because they're just so powerful. So in 2018, we collected a group of people across multiple commodities, oil and gas, base metals, precious metals, suppliers, miners, in a room to design the surface roadmap of the future. So what does the surface mining of the future look like? And it's funny, I asked one person at the end of the workshop, so what do you think? What did you think of the workshop? And it was telling, right? He said, Carl, I didn't want to be here. I thought it was totally useless. We have nothing in common with oil and gas. We're hard rock miners. It's a waste of time. I just came here because my boss told me to show up. And now I'm going to have to work all weekend. But then he said, but I had no idea we had so much in common with these other people. We're actually going out for dinner tonight to explore opportunities to work together. So that paradigm shift, that cognitive dissonance, was just broken down by getting people into the room and discussing opportunities. So it's gone from we can't work with them to they're our best partners. And we now have projects and consortia with multiple commodities at the table. By breaking, it's not just about what you do and how you do it, it's who you do it with. Mm. So that design thinking is about that people-centric aspect, and it's looking at from design principles, not engineering principles. Engineering comes last.
Mm. And I guess ultimately gets everyone out of their furrow of linear thinking, which is the killer, isn't it? It's the how do we work from where we are rather than how do we work from a whole new vantage point, a whole new perspective on the issue.
Exactly.
Well, so let's kind of, again, sort of go into that a bit more. So you've mentioned this, the prototype that kind of came into it or was ready back in December last year. But how did you even get there? How did you unpack that kind of phrase you used of that platform? How did you unpack the typical mining platform to even find those opportunities for new routes forward? Because just for everyone listening, it's not that I'm trying to avoid talking about mining, but I just want to make sure we're also looking at what can other sectors take from this. So how did you unpack that discussion about how things work to get to this, the point of focus that then ultimately led to a massive energy reduction through this new prototype? How did you do that?
So basically, the first step we did was put a bunch of senior people in a room for a couple of days. And we've done this with surface mining, underground mining, and processing. The processing one took a couple of years because it was so big. But we put them executives in a room from multi-commodities, invited guests, mining companies, suppliers, et cetera, and basically used design thinking to create a roadmap. What is the future of, in this case, processing, if we're looking to reduce energy by 50% in 10 years? What does that look like? And these roadmaps are basically one-pagers that disassemble our current thought process and challenges our existing paradigms of what processing is today versus where it should be in the future. So what these roadmaps do is you get people together to align the mining companies and the suppliers with an end goal. Here are the key challenges we need to tackle. Some people call them swim lanes. We need to do specific things related to energy breakage energy and breakage, for example. We need to make sure that we're aligning the ecosystem and collaborating differently together. So there's things like this. So we do the roadmap, and that provides two key functions. As I said, it gets alignment. It gets alignment across the entire supply chain. And it shows there's lots of overlap between, we all have common problems, let's collaborate. But the second thing it does as well is provides that pathway. Because as I said, on the combination, on the new technology for combination, it's impossible, we can't do it. Here's a pathway to get there. So that's basically what we did. So you create the roadmap, and then you get, once that's done and agreed to, and they're really simple, they're one pages with some background stuff. Once you get there, is you put a subset of people in a room and say, okay, where do you want to focus? Strategy sessions. Okay, here are the key issues. Strategy sessions. What do you want to focus on? Energy combination is huge. Okay, let's dive down into that. What are the key issues here? Well, there's a lot of people working on incremental aspects of combination. We need to change the platform. What do we need to do? Right. So we ended up focusing on new technology to reduce energy by 50%. It was a line item in our roadmap. Assembled the team and then went down the path to actually create that. And a key piece of this, as you picked up, Alex, is that when we're doing this, as I said, we're not focusing on the incremental pieces, we're focused on the platforms. So if we want to get to, for example, 50% reduction in energy, what are the platform processes and technologies holding us back? In processing, it happens to be ball mills, right? For example, they waste energy. We all know it. We can't change it. Let's tackle that. By the same token, underground mining. What are some of the issues in underground mining related to carbonization, related to energy, related to water, related to tailings? It's the platform, multiple platforms in the platform process of the drill and blast process. What if you could replace that process with something that would, for example, reduce the amount of material that you send to surface by, say, 50%? Just imagine that. If you could eliminate 50% of the material that goes to the surface, how does that change your energy equation in the mill? It potentially reduces energy by, 30 to 50% right there. What does it do with your tailings footprint? It reduces the tailings footprint by 30 to 50% right away. But to do that, you need to tackle those platform processes one at a time. And in fact, we've got multiple consortia in process right now, tackling a couple of the key platform processes. So it's really, those are a couple of examples. Start with roadmap, get alignment, mining companies primarily, because they have to pull this, strategy sessions, where do you want to focus, assemble the teams. And this is the key concept I mentioned before about business ecosystems. You don't just sit there and get cool people together. It's who do we need around the table to solve this problem? And in most of our consortia, we have, well, I would say all of them, we have people around the table who have never worked together before. So by aligning on common challenges and getting excitement about trying to solve these challenges, you can actually attract the right people to solve these problems. And the processing example I gave is a stellar example of that. 31 people around the world, 5 years, show the prototype.
Incredible. And so through those discussions, I mean, there were a number of different opportunities that you identified, and then you narrowed in on this one particular. But what other, just to give us a bit of a flavor, so there was the grinding, the crushing, this intense use of energy for this critical activity as part of the platform. What else came up that was kind of like a close run contender that could have been in the mix for further development?
So it's interesting. There's a couple of things that came out of that. We actually held a workshop in December of 2018, a project development workshop with the roadmap, and we had about 60 or 70 people from across Canada. I think we had a few from outside of Canada as well, just to actually tear that apart and say, what do we need to focus on in terms of projects, and identified 7 projects. 5 of them just weren't quite at the level to move forward, but 2 we started working on. One of them is on microwaves. Microwaves have been around for, 30 years, but they haven't really been deployed at any scale. So by assembling people in this workshop, and somebody stood up in the workshop, it'll never work. It's been going on for 30 years. Stop now. Just stop. Move on. And then people ask the question, well, why doesn't it work? And a few people started bantering, and the project team got together, and these people had never worked together before, launched a project. It's called Can Micro, and it's actually just finished. I think the past 18 months, they've been working together on using microwaves for ore sorting and rock breakage. So that's one example. Another one was related to data. The challenge is we rely on this business ecosystem concept relies on participation of volunteers in the mining industry who are already over committed. So it's kind of gone on the wayside for now. We're trying to get it back up and running, but it was about data and processing plans. Can we share data, build a platform, analyze the data, and see where we can go with that? So those are a couple of examples. A third one, actually, this came up later, is on the whole sensor-based ore sorting. So a key challenge is, and this has come up in multiple roadmaps, is the whole idea of ore body knowledge. So from exploration, here's our drill core, to underground and surface mining, this is what we have, into the processing plants. Can you actually trace and get the knowledge of the ore body as it changes throughout the process? So you actually get the full spectrum of data and analysis of what's the mineralogy and all this sort of stuff of the components within your system as it goes through the process. Can you actually do mineralogical analysis? Are there sensors to do that in multiple commodities? Can you do ore sorting on the ground or in front of the mill at, for example, ppm levels of gold, specific to gold sets? So there's other things that have come up as a result. Those are 3 examples, and we actually have a consortium in sensor-based ore sorting right now as well. International, looking at all of these questions, but ore body knowledge is something key across every roadmap we have.
Mm. And so you mentioned that the goal, well, not just the goal, the way this needs to work, it cannot just be taking one part of a given supply chain. It has to include kind of various different partners, stakeholders, and so forth. But like I have definitely used the phrase alignment across a value chain or alignment across the supply chain before. But what does it mean here? Like, what practically, what does it mean? Because I imagine there are many leaders and in various hard to abate sectors who are thinking, well, our supply chain is aligned. But what does it mean in this kind of context that you're talking about?
So a couple of key pieces of alignment. One is this is what where the industry is going, what they need. Let's focus on solving that versus here's my solution. There's no problem. We're trying to sell something. So that disconnect, we see it all the time. And we get, SMEs and startups coming to us asking for advice on what the industry needs are and where they're going. What about this product? If you did this, tailored a little bit, you'd have a direct fit. So it's that sort of alignment. And the second one is alignment on how to work with mining companies. Getting away from the transactional modality, here's my stuff I want to sell you, right? Versus this is what you actually need. Let's co-develop it together. And that's a huge piece. It is, can we get the supply chain more in the co-development pathway versus buy sell? So those are two key pieces of alignment. It's not just about selling product. It's about addressing specific needs or higher order needs and selling product at the same time. And this, another piece of this potentially that the industry is learning this slowly is the whole idea of coopetition. So we see this, you talk about alignment between miners and suppliers, but you can collaborate and compete at the same time. How do you do that? Right? The software business has been doing this for decades. Cutthroat companies have been working together to collaborate, and they go outside and they compete. And this is where the platform approach comes in. Can you have a neutral sort of platform approach that you co-develop that then each of your companies can take away and add your secret sauce to it and then sell two different pieces. But the platform's designed by the companies, the mining companies, so there's value to it. You just add more value by adding, I don't know, AI and control functions or something else to it to provide value. It's like a cell phone, right? If you take a look at the Android cell phone, the platform that runs that Android is co-developed by people who compete. They add value to that platform, and then they go and sell. So that's the sort of way we look at alignment, trying to push the industry towards this whole co-development piece as well. Does that make sense?
It does. I think we see some of that. I know in the cement sector, there's been, I don't think I've heard the phrase or the word coopetition before, but I've seen and heard sort of similar things there where there have been, especially around issues relating to sustainability, where there has been a real interest to co-develop or at the very least co-diagnose maybe a route forward. And for us, that for Decarb Connect, that's very much, I suppose, at the root of how we're trying to approach this, because clearly you are a great example of why there's real value in focusing on a single sector and drilling into it. We take that aligned view, I hope, also which is that cross-sector collaboration also really can drive progress and also accelerate progress for all concerned. But yeah, I'd love to see our decarbonisation leaders network moving into competition. Maybe that's a separate conversation for you and I.
Absolutely.
But let me bring you back then to actually something you mentioned really towards the beginning of the conversation. So you were talking about the idea that your kind of focus is not decarbonisation, as I had introduced it. Apologies, and it's not sustainability, but it is on how does mining get to be a zero waste sector, zero waste as the focus or the ambition, rather than just taking CO2 out of the operational outputs. So let's just talk about that for a moment. So zero tailings, 0% emissions, really, is that possible? And in as much time as we have, which is obviously podcast time, not the full detail it would need, what would it take to really deliver zero tailings and 0% emissions? Are we closer to understanding that?
Well, your first question, Alex, can you do it? Absolutely. Right. I'm of the opinion that anything can be done. And there's a quote I often refer to by Napoleon Hill, and it's not politically correct, but I'll use the original quote, and it goes something like, "What the mind of man can conceive, and the mind of man can believe, man can achieve." So if you think of it, which we've done, you can believe in it, which a lot of people do, then we can achieve it. And I believe we're on the pathway to achieving this right now. So yes, it can be done. What do we need to, and actually, if you look back at the whole issue on decarbonization, electrification, that's part of the pathway to get to zero, right? It is part of the pathway. If you look at the focus on ore sorting in mining companies, that's getting on the pathway to zero. The focus on using mechanical cutting underground, for example, that's getting on they're all getting on the pathway to zero. So I think we're already there. What else do we need to do? And some of that is basically, I talked about before, the current paradigms, right? Shift our paradigm thinking about who we work with, how we do it, and what we're trying to do. And I'll give you an example of that with one of our projects, where we've identified a focus area. So in surface mining, for example, a lot of the industry now is focused on, here's our existing platform of big haul trucks, 300-ton haul trucks or whatever they are. Let's change the batteries, or let's change them from the fuel from diesel to battery. So they're focused on the same platform, just swapping the fuel. What we're looking at is alternatives to haul trucks. So can you get rid of, eventually, four-wheeled rubber tire trucks? Because they're inefficient, they're the highest capex, opex in the industry, et cetera, and they're running diesel. But instead of just electrifying, can you do something different? So one of our projects, it's called Alternative Haulage, evaluated 27 technologies around the world that the mining industry aren't using right now. So, for example, one of the technologies is maglev trains. Not haul trucks, maglev trains. There's technology that was used in aircraft carriers to move munitions from aircraft carriers that can reticulate around the benches on a surface mine. So looking way outside the box. But a key part of this is we have actually developed a holistic modeling framework for how you determine if you can actually use this in a mine site. Will it integrate into existing fleets of haul trucks, number one? What's the ESG impact? What's the GHG impact? Like a whole holistic framework versus the typical NPC and this sort of stuff, right? It's bigger than that. So we have a conversation in 2 hours on the next step for this project. So that's one example, right? Getting people to think away from the existing platforms that we have and look at alternatives. And that applies all the way across the board too. So for example, in exploration, can you find a deposit without a drill? Can you do that, right? Ask, as I said before, in the combination piece, ask a question and go down the pathway to try and solve it. There's technologies in quantum physics that are out there right now that might be able to be used to do that. Can you do that? Don't know. A lot of large mining companies look at world-class assets, right? Does that world-class asset need to be contiguous? Does it have to be in one location, or can you have an asset that you deplete in 5 years and move your modular mine somewhere else and do the next piece of your world-class asset for another 5 years, et cetera? So it's thinking and challenging the paradigms. That's what we call ourselves, Rethink Mining, is let's take a look at these problems differently. So I believe, yes, you can do it. We've got to challenge some of our thinking about the business, who we operate with, and potentially even cognitive diversity within the mining companies, right? You need diversity of thought in the mining companies. There's a colleague of mine doing his master's degree in this process, in this question right now. Diversity of thought in senior executive leadership. And I mentioned this before too, by focusing on the platforms versus incremental improvement, you can have massive changes. So as I mentioned before about zero tailings, if we can ensure that we use mechanical cutting to be the first piece of the new underground platform, that'll open the door for everything else, right? So you've got to do the first step, and it'll get people to think differently. And by looking at the integrated, it's not just about processing or underground mining, it's about the integration. And the last piece is we have to collaborate. Now, I will say really, because what we're seeing is there are companies that like to collaborate. There's ones that say they collaborate, but we need to collaborate really, where we're actually really co-developing these solutions. So yes, we need to change a few things. We're on the pathway of doing it.
I'm going to pick up on something you're saying, which is about the need for that sort of the different personalities, different mindsets to come into mining to address this. But I'm also then going to pick up on something else you said, which is that example of one of the working groups you gave where someone who had just been sent there and didn't really want to be there actually being a key reason why that was able to move forward. And I think that's something that all kinds of companies can miss, and that often when they're looking at innovation as an opportunity or challenge, they want to get the people in the room who are just going to make it work. Just, you're more innovative, you go. And actually your point was, having those dissenting voices is absolutely essential to how these things become reality. I was just looking up on my phone. If you thought, apologies to apologies to Carl, who probably thought I was being very rude while we were recording, but I was just trying to remember. It was Bill Sharp, who I interviewed over the new year, who's the Three Horizons innovation writer and thinker. And again, he was saying something very similar, which is you need these, in his words, these three different mindsets to come together for real change to be made. And I think that's what I'm hearing from what you're saying as well. This isn't just about get the innovators in a room and it'll all be okay. This is, get all sorts of brain power in the room who can dissent, agree, unpick, and challenge.
Well, it's funny you say that, Alex, because a term we use in some of our strategy sessions with the miners and the suppliers is challenge and confront. So when somebody says something, one of our innovation managers will jump right in and basically challenge that statement and confront the issue. So it actually pushes people. And without that sort of facilitation and that challenge and confront mentality and diversity of thought, you'll get stuck in the same sort of cognitive biases that have been there forever. But that being said, I would say that I think the industry's come a long way. I've been at CMIC for 8 years, and when I started, it was challenging. I'm seeing a significant growth in companies and organizations wanting to collaborate, thinking differently, bring new people on board. If you look at digital, in 2015, digital was unknown, and everybody's focused in this space now. Mining companies are hiring people with PhDs in computer science. They never would have before, unless it was an operations or SAP system. So this is all really good, and they're starting to reach out more to startups and incubators and SMEs outside the industry. So we're seeing that shift. So roundabout way to go back to the question, can it get to zero? The industry is in the right pathway to do that.
Okay, well, kind of a wrap-up question. Again, this is really just because I'm aware that in our listening audience and also in our members network and across our community, there's a range of industrials and investors and technology companies. So to kind of step away from the specifics of mining, what is the mental model, which is this phrase I love at the moment, what is the mental model that you think other sectors, so not related to mining specifically, but more generally interested in this sort of totally innovative approach to a real radical rethink about how we work as industries? What mental models could they take from the work that you're doing if they're trying to sort of think about how to even apply this in a small way? What would you be suggesting?
So I'm gonna flip that first and then answer the question. So I'm going to flip it because a lot of the mental models we used here, like the road mapping, the business ecosystems, platforms, other industries have been using that for decades. So software industry, microelectronics industry got away from roadmaps about 5 years ago. They're done with it. We're just starting. Right. So even the pharmaceutical industry is creating, and the defense industry are creating, business ecosystems using the coopetition model. So there's a lot of people that have already done this. We're just borrowing from it. I guess the mental model that other sectors who are not doing this, again, it comes down to the whole idea of design thinking. Look at whether it's your business or your sector, look at it differently. Right. And challenge the paradigms of your business constantly, challenge and confront, whatever, but use design thinking or the platforms. And again, the platforms are common. They're common in many industries, but are there platforms from other industries, for example, transportation, that can be used in mining? So think of mining as a potential customer. Or if there's SMEs out there that are selling to mining, can you take that product you have, retool it a little bit into a platform and sell to other industries? So it is challenging that sort of that paradigm thinking. And lastly is, again, I mentioned this before, but the whole business ecosystem idea. Reach out to find the really good people that can solve this. It is likely not in your industry. It's probably not the people you thought of. I remember, I'll give you an example. I was reminded years ago that one of the top this is a long time ago, one of the top gaming companies that was sold to a top tier, a gaming startup that was sold to a top tier gaming company a number of years ago, was actually created by a team composed of 2 psychologists. They weren't computer scientists. You look at a gaming company as being computer scientists. So think differently. Right? Think totally differently about who should be on your team to do that challenge and confront, to make you change your paradigms and to add value to whatever you're doing. So I'll just leave it at that.
Good place to finish. Thank you, Carl. I knew I'd enjoy this, but thanks for bringing just a lot of interesting ideas. And as you say, these stories to illustrate them as well. It's been great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alex. It's been amazing. Hopefully we can talk again soon.